All right, Kavin, again, thanks for taking the time. Can you describe your experience working in the sports media industry, in your field, right, as a racial and ethnic minority?
Yeah, it's a little different. I work in hockey, so hockey is not the most diverse sport in the world. It's we are breaking a little barriers over with the Sharks. My boss she's the first female black team photographer in NHL history. So she took over from my previous boss, whose name is Brandon Magnus. But she's been awesome, and it's been different because obviously you're dealing with a world that doesn't include ethnic minorities quite a bit and doesn't always welcome them the same way that they should, but have grown quite a bit ever since I've been there. I mean, everyone I work with is awesome. Everyone's been super inclusive with what we do. It's interesting because I don't see a lot of ethnic minorities around when I'm working, obviously with the people I work with and the teams that come into town. And then when I meet other team photographers, it's not as many, but they've all been incredible people to work with, and nobody's really been any mean or anything like that to us. We've all been had a lot of fun doing what we do, and we're still able to accomplish all of our goals the same way we want to as anybody else. And it's been pretty cool because my boss has been interviewed by a few people talking about the fact that she's the first black female team photographer. I think she was just interviewed by NBC Sports the other day before one of our games just to talk about her life as a photographer. And then they might hopefully interview me soon to talk about being an Indian photographer working for the Sharks. So that'd be pretty cool. But it's been fun. I mean, I've been working there for 5 years now. Um, Being in the hockey world is definitely a lot different than working in college when you're with a lot of. I went to San Jose State, and San Jose State has a very diverse campus and a very diverse people that you get to work with all the time. And it's a little bit like a little fish in a big pond when you go to a team or work in the NHL. But it's been a lot of fun.
Let's backtrack. Motivation, right? What kind of motivated you to get into photography? And kind of, I mean, again, it's still considered in the world of sports media. So what was your motivation with that? Was it just watching sports growing up? I mean, can you give us a little background on your
Yeah,
life before this job?
So I always wanted to play sports. I always wanted to become a professional baseball player. That was like every kid's dream, be a professional sports athlete. And then I obviously hit with the reality of that's probably not going to happen. When that reality hit, I was like, I really want to be able to stay as close as I possibly can to sports. So covering sports was the best avenue to do so. I took an amazing journalism class at De Anza College, and I had an incredible professor that taught us everything about journalism, and that's what got me hooked. And then thinking that I could then interview players, be around people, and that's how I can become a part of sports in a different way other than playing it. And I always thought that photography was a cool little niche part of it. I picked up a camera when I was at San Jose State, and I kind of realized that it was more of my passion to learn visually. I've always been a visual learner my whole life. I wanted to be an architect originally, and I loved drafting and designing. And then when I found out that you could cover journalism through a lens of a camera, I thought that was so much more fun than sitting around writing articles and interviewing people. And as much fun as that is, shooting photos is a lot of fun, and being able to tell a story visually is right up my alley and everything I love to do. And as soon as I was able to start covering sports and being around athletes and seeing how their mood changes and being able to capture all those things, I got hooked.
Zooming the lens out, figuratively speaking. I mean, do you think that there's a lack in talking, in generalities, right? Do you think that there's a lack of diversity in the sports media field as a whole?
100%. It's very, very like I see a small niche part of it because I obviously work in the Bay Area, and it's a little bit different because we have pretty well diverse across the board in the Bay Area. But whenever I see media and people come from other spaces and other different cities and things like that, there's definitely a lack of minority presence there.
Have you encountered any barriers or challenges due to your race, your ethnicity while working in sports media?
Luckily for me, I haven't. None yet, knock on wood. But it's definitely been a welcoming scene that I've been a part of, especially because the people I've worked with have been really cool. But I know there's definitely a lot of people that probably have to deal with different situations than I do. And luckily, the team I work with was pretty awesome.
What's the sense of pride like? I mean, again, just your background, knowing that there's not a lot, like you said, small fish, ocean.
Mhm.
Um, any pride in that?
Yeah, I love it. I think it's super cool. When I tell my family members or anybody that I'm around that I'm an Indian team photographer for a hockey team, it's one of the coolest things I can talk about because it's a predominantly white field of NHL hockey, and the fact that I can be able to say that I'm part of that world and being able to cover it the way that I do and a team that's in my backyard, I think is just super awesome.
And I guess going off of that, do you feel like there's a responsibility attached to it? Again, as a minority in your community and in your work.
Yeah, I think a little bit less so in the Bay Area just because of how diverse we are. But I think in general, I think you feel a little bit of like an extra sense of you want to prove yourself a little bit. I know that like the people that I follow in the field, a lot of the team photographers that I follow are not minorities. And so whenever I want to put myself out there and show my work, I always feel an extra sense of like, got to make sure my stuff's really good. Want to make sure that I can show off the best work that I possibly can, like any other photographer does. But I feel like there's a little bit added to it when I think about who I am and how I want to break into that field.
Zooming in a bit more kind of on your line of work with photography, obviously San Jose is a very diverse, but in the league as a whole, would you say there is a lack of focus on the minority athletes? Would you say more pictures are generally taken of kind of the Caucasian athletes as opposed to, the athletes that maybe aren't getting as much attention?
I think it's tough because there's just not a lot of them. I think if there were more, we'd see more photos of them. I think it more goes along lines of it's not there's less of those people, so there's going to be less photos of them. I don't think there's less of a focus on them. I mean, I know we used to focus on Evander Kane a lot when he was on the Sharks, just because he was really good. I think it's mostly who's the better players on teams now, less so who they are. But the problem is there's just a lack of diversity in hockey itself.
How can do you or what's your opinion on these organizations and how they can better promote diversity and inclusion in their hiring and reporting practices?
Um, that's a good question. I honestly don't know. Uh, it's hard. I mean, I think casting a wider net always really helps. It's hard to say in the Bay Area because I haven't really experienced like the lack of there's obviously a lack of diversity in the sport that I work in, but in the area and field that I'm in is San Jose and it's in the Bay Area. And there's a lot of diversity here, and I see a lot of diversity happening in the area that I'm in. So I don't know if I'm the right person to ask that because I see it more than probably a lot of places do. Totally. I agree. I think one of the ways is just showing off your diversity. I mean, I know that my boss likes to show a lot when she goes on different networks and talks about what she does. I think that's huge to let other people know that, hey, there's an avenue for you if you're not of, if you are a minority trying to get into this field. And I think showing off that is something that maybe teams could do more, like show off like a podcast more with their talking with minority people that work for their team. We have a podcast for the Sharks, and my boss has been on it quite a bit, and they promote it all the time, talking about how she's the first female Black team photographer and letting people know this is what she does. And I think it's a great way for people for minorities specifically to be able to tell that they can achieve that goal and to be a part of that field, even though it typically isn't part of what we think is something we can achieve after we're done with sports.
Another general question here, Kavin. Do you think that diversity in newsrooms, control rooms, front offices can lead to better coverage and more accurate representation?
Yeah, I think it leads to a lot better storytelling. I'm not to, I mean, obviously, I don't want to say that people aren't good at storytelling at the job they have, but I think some of the creative stories that we've been able to tell in the past year that we've come up with have been very different than what people would think, and what I've seen in other teams and how the sport is covered. I think the way that I think there's a different perspective that is added that I think is lost if you don't have it. That's a different way to look at the sport of hockey, and I think that we've been able to do that so far this year.
What's photography like in general? I mean, in the NHL, um, again, just can you just talk about just fundamentally what it means to you, photography at that level, with so many, professionals around?
It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of pressure. They call it the fastest sport in the world for a reason. You have to be on your toes at all times. I think what makes it so incredible to cover is how fast paced it is. People joke about how slow. I do baseball and I do hockey, so I do the two polar opposite sports when I cover them. But hockey is the fastest game and it will keep you always guessing as to what's going to happen next, and that's what makes the photos that you can take of it so much more powerful. Is because at any moment anything can change. A puck could bounce the wrong way. A team could end up scoring a goal that ends up being the difference in the game just because someone made one mistake. And that can happen almost every game you cover. I mean, this year's been a little rough since the Sharks have had a tough season, but overall, it's been a rewarding experience to be able to cover some of the best players in the world that come through and play here. I think the fact that I get to cover some players that I've always dreamed about covering as a kid, and being able to watch them live and being able to capture those moments is huge. And we submit our photos to Getty. So when we, as team photographers, we have to give some of the photos that we take to Getty Images. And so being able to see my stuff on different team pages from other teams that come in to play us of some of the top players in the world is a pretty amazing and rewarding thing.
When you look at, I mean, I don't have the numbers exactly. I should, but we know, for instance, the NBA, right? Majority African American talent. NFL, same thing. When you look at kind of the underrepresentation of, or sorry, they're very represented in terms of, how, all the photos that they're on and all that, right? But when you look at, as I was saying earlier, the newsrooms and all this, it's a lot less percentages in terms of minority, right? How do you think that changes the way stories are told? I mean, we were talking to other folks and they're like, well, it's great when, I'm African American and I get to cover an African American athlete, like that's cool. But if you're African American or you're Indian or you're Hispanic and you have to cover, an athlete of a different race or ethnic background, how do you think that changes the way again these stories are run?
I think it's a little different because the way you look at it, you can't have that same personal aspect. I think if I looked at a billboard and I saw a picture of an Indian photographer, I'd feel like it's like a powerful image. Like I can be like, I want to be like that person. There's always that little separation that comes when you're looking at like athletes or you're looking at people that are like being represented and it's not the same person as you, whether it be like because of race or minority or whatever it may be. It's you can't relate to it exactly the same. I've always found that like when you're representing not being able to be as representative of everybody, it kind of feels like have a disconnect of like, I don't know if I can achieve that goal. I don't know if I can go that far because I can't see myself in that same light that they are. And it's kind of a little disheartening because you almost feel like, well, if I can't get to that, even if I get to that point, will I ever be like that person that's on the billboards or that person that's being shown to millions of people? I can't even picture myself being that person.
And kind of, you talked about the billboard example. Would you say as an Indian photographer, there's not many that fit that particular, combination? Would you say you feel maybe like a pressure to perform at a high level to kind of be like a role model for maybe future people that may be inspired by seeing you on a billboard in the future?
Yeah, 100%. I feel like there's a little bit of pressure there because I know there's not a lot of us in the field. It's so funny because my first day working for Major League Baseball, I learned there was one other Indian photographer on our team, and his last name is Mistry. He's not related to me, but it's just so funny how the only other Indian photographer I've ever met also has the same last name as me. He lives in Toronto and he's in obviously a different country than me, but that's the only other Indian photographer I know. And it's ironic that his name was Mystery because I'm like, there really isn't a whole lot of us. And it's almost like the same person at some points. So yeah, I feel like there's a big point of emphasis to be like, I can prove to other Indian people that are especially ones that have that family pressure of like, you need to be a certain thing as like a model of like, you don't have to be what everybody expects you to be.
What advice, Kavin, would you give to aspiring minority journalists, or sorry, minority photographers? And how does that advice differ, right, from a non-racial or ethnic minority?
Push yourself. Always make yourself the best candidate you can possibly be. I would give this advice to anybody, but I think what helps, especially in a field where it's predominantly not having minorities represented well in the field that I'm in, is to always push yourself by using your resources around you. Covering sports that aren't always like covered as much, being able to shore up your portfolio, because at the end of the day, in the job that I'm in, it's not about who you are, it's about what you can be able to do. And if you can present a better portfolio than everybody else, then that's where you should shine, and that's where you should show people off the work that you can do.